I have a history with Air Lake about 40 years ago. I worked up at the airport in Crookston, and the owner bought a 140, and he fixed it up, and I was nominated to fly it down here when the owner, he wasn't checked out tail draggers, and I was. But the airplane was Cessna 90190, Cessna 140. Is anybody familiar with that plane here? You are.
I own that airplane now.
You own it.
Yeah.
Have you had any brake problems with it?
Actually, it survived the tornado down in Faribault.
Oh.
What was 3 years ago now? 4 years ago, yeah, 2018. So it had a bunch of stuff fall on top of it, so it's damaged, but it'll fly again.
Oh, good to hear. Yeah, that plane was in a farm building, and north of almost to Grand Forks. And I flew it out of this farmer's strip in October. It was dark, and I didn't know if this airplane was airworthy or not. It was a ferry flying 40 miles. But we got it to the airport in Fertile, is where we worked on it. And Earl gave it an annual, Earl Miller, who I worked for, he gave it an annual, and everything was fine, and he had me taxi it around. And every time I took it out to taxi, the left brake was soft. And I'd bring it back to Earl, and he'd look at it and leave the brakes and take it out again, and it was soft again. Earl would ride along with me, and those brakes worked perfectly. Every time, we did like 3 times those brakes worked perfectly when I had somebody riding with me. So I swear your airplane is cursed to me.
I think the brakes are different, probably.
It probably are.
They're Cleveland's now.
Oh, yeah, I think these were the old,
Yeah.
I don't know what they were.
Yeah, about a few years.
But I delivered it down here, and the owner, I told him the story, and yeah, whatever. You know, so he wasn't too worried about it. Well, my name is Wild Bill Kelso. Now it's really Terry Lundby. I'm sorry, I had to put that up there. I began flying at age 16 and solo later that year when I turned 17. And that was about all the further I took my flying certificates. I built one of the very first Easy Riser ultralights, and I think that is what's sitting back there against the wall is an Easy Riser. And I put a 12 horsepower McCullough on the back of it, and picked it up and ran with it. And I got it airborne about 7 times, and then sanity returned to my head. But it was unusual. 2 years ago, my girlfriend and I drove to Florida, and I bought an engine down there. And 2 hangars down was the creator of the very first ultralight Easy Riser, John Moody. And I knew he was there, so I brought one of my styrofoam and spruce ribs to give to him. And he said, "My God, you got one of the first cam Easy Risers." After the 10th one was built, the ribs were made of aluminum. So anyway, that's my my stories. I have time in the usual suspects: Skyhawks, Archers, Citabrias, and I snuck my crop dusting boss's Cessna 188 egg truck up for a ride one time, and he kind of said I could do it, but I never actually told him I did. And that's really, I've let my medicals and biannual slide. I haven't flown for piloting command since about 1985. Going on to be an artist. Artists must always look serious. If you have any promotional publications, you've got to look serious. Art is serious. It's a very serious thing. Again, art is serious. A few years ago, I got a ride in an Air National Guard, or Air Force Reserve C-130, and I was on the flight deck, and well, you got to be serious when you're an artist. Well, maybe not. I'm feeding my face here. And on to my paintings. I was kind of looking for my pictures of paintings for this presentation. I was looking for one that I really wanted to find and I couldn't for the life of me. And it was my very first commission. And it was for a gentleman named, family bought it for a gentleman named Jim Lagwood. Is that, did I get that? Jim Ladwig, I'm sorry. I'm nervous. Jim Ladwig here, Ladwig has the very first painting that I did. And I'm gonna have you send me an email and send me a picture. Thank you. This is one of my paintings I did about 20 years ago. And it won the Par Excellence Award from the EAA back when they had a art program. And it's been in both Flying Magazine and Sport Aviation. And this painting here, I'll get into a little detail of it. But when I painted it, my intention wasn't so much to paint an airplane, but I wanted to paint the visual effect. And the visual effect in this painting is the sunlight hitting the ocean and reflecting off the undersides of the wings. And I think it's a nice effect. It's kind of brings the shadows down, and I like it just because of that. I also included the vapor, the low pressure vapor over the one wing, and it kind of obscures the tail. And this is an 01 bird dog, and here again my visual effect was to show it in mist and kind of light being illuminated all around it. So again, there weren't too many shadows under the wings. If you had a really bright sunny day, you wouldn't even be able to see the undersides of the wings because of the shadows. And I like the bird dog because it's plain, it's a warbird that I think I could have flown, 40 years ago when I was a little more on top of things. But it's one of my favorite planes. And another bird dog, this one here, kind of working on it still, but it's flying over the region of west of Saigon in Vietnam after a monsoon rain season. Boeing F-4B. My girlfriend, she has this painting. She had it on Etsy, and well, somebody bought it. And turned out it was her because she loves yellow. So I have to be nice to her. This airplane, by the way, was the very first Boeing production airplane that was all metal. The fuselage was a monocoque construction. The wing spars were aluminum. The only thing not metal on it was the wing fabric. Other than that, it was a pretty modern airplane. I used a 1/72 scale model of this as a resource. And like I said, the painting is now in the possession of Ms. Lynn Arnsdorf. Here we have the Spitfire. I painted this about 30 years ago. And back then, I tried to eliminate every brush stroke that I could. I would take a fan butt brush and just try to smooth everything out. And I don't do that anymore. I don't like the style. But I do like the airplane. I think it's a nice painting. Not much I can say about the Spitfire that you guys haven't heard about, other than when the first Spitfire flew, it flew next to Gloucester Gladiator biplane fighters. And when the last Spitfire came out of production, it was flying next to Gloucester Meteor jets. So it really filled it, to find a generation of these airplanes. This here is a MiG-17, also known as a LIM-6. It's a LIM-6, it's built by the Polish. company, I don't know what that is. But I was commissioned by this lady on the right. She's a science school teacher near Hartford, Connecticut. And when the Cold War ended and surplus stuff became available from behind the Iron Curtain, she says, I'm gonna buy a MiG-15 or a MiG-17. And she did, had it shipped over to the States and set it up in her backyard. I don't know what her neighbors thought of that, but she has it there. Actually, she did sell it a few years ago, and the last I heard about it, it's flying in Florida. This painting here, I worked on it, it seemed like forever, and I couldn't get it to where I really liked it. There was something just missing about it, and I couldn't identify it. But eventually I came up with the idea of just painting the windscreen pretty much a solid color. It was no longer transparent, and I think it made the painting pop. It's one of those things I was pretty happy with. Again, with the Aussies, in addition to the bird dogs and OV-10s, the Australians flew O-10s in the forward air control role while they were seconded to the United States Air Force. And this here is flying north of the Saigon area. And I'd like to thank former Flight Lieutenant Chris Hudnut, who commissioned me to do this painting. And yeah, the iconic Phantom. It's one of my top 10 airplanes. I really like the Phantoms. And again, with the windscreen, I kind of did a formula with that and repeated what I did on the MiG. And I like it. And I also painted it in much smoother style, or excuse me, in much more artistic style. Minnesota Mustang. Do any of you recognize this airplane on the left? This airplane is at the Minnesota Air National Guard Museum. It's the one they have on display. And originally, they got this plane from the United States Army by somebody in England and somewhere else, and it eventually ended up back in Minnesota. It was originally a Cavalier Mustang, as you see on the right. And the Army bought that airplane in 1967, along with another Cavalier Mustang. You can see the tail is taller, and it has drop tanks. And the Army was running a program back then for the attack helicopter called the Cheyenne. And the Cheyenne was so fast, they needed something to keep up with those chase planes. So they bought two Mustangs. And they thought, I'm sure somebody thought this would be fun to have. And, I don't know if it's really necessary. But Minnesota Air National Guard Museum got that plane eventually, and they've restored it to what it looks like nowadays. Okay. This is how I start my painting process. Actually, that's not my studio. That's much neater than my studio. When I start a painting, I'll start with thumbnail sketches. And that's, a thumbnail sketch is something on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Doesn't matter what kind. And I will I'll draw little squares, and in each little square I'll put in the airplane where I think it should be positioned, and the lights and darks. Or I'll change the proportion of the canvas, where I think the canvas should be. And to the right is somebody did some really cool drawings on the internet, and I thought, I'm going to use them. Neither one of these are my works here. I just didn't want to dig out my camera and take pictures of my chicken scratch. When I'm done doing thumbnail sketches, I move on to model airplanes. Any of you old timers here remember this? Yeah. Younger people, I don't know if you've ever been in a hobby shop that had nothing but walls about airplanes. It's something you were missing. It was a great time to be. There is a hobby shop in St. Paul called Scale Model Supplies. And they have rows, 2 rows of nothing but model airplane kits, probably the width of this hangar, probably 50, 60 feet of them. Okay, what kind of model do I use? Well, it depends, this kind or that kind. I just happen on that. But I use model airplanes because I can better control the image. Cameras are really terrible liars. I use a camera, but I use it sparingly, and it's something you can often see. This guy took a picture of the top wing of an A-26, and he used it for his painting. And that didn't work so good. He used it for his painting, and you can see how distorted the wing is. It's very distorted. It just doesn't look right. And you see that very often in aviation art. And you can just, in fact, there's pictures of airplanes, different artists have used them, use the same photograph for a different painting, but you see the same distortions, and it's, I've done it too, but I learned my lesson many years ago. It's just not worth it to come up with something that poor. Let's see. Well, all right. This is a model of an OV-10 Bronco, and I was commissioned by another Australian to do a painting of this OV-10 Bronco that he flew in Vietnam. And I like to use models because I can put them in any position I want. I can photograph underneath them, above them. I can put 2 of them together. It just allows me a lot of freedom of composition. Once I find a photograph I liked, I import it into my computer. Actually, I can't even stop that anymore. It's done automatically. And I can put it into Photoshop and I get a really nice drawing of the painting. It allows me to scale it up to whatever size the canvas is, and I work from there. I'll also go to Google Earth and research whatever area the airplane was involved in. This is a river over Dian, South Dakota, D-I-A-N, South Dakota, South Vietnam. And that's what I use for a resource. When I get to a point where I get the airplane painted, this one here, I painted the cockpit area very detailed, and then I kind of just worked in the rest of the airplane quickly. Took a photograph of it, put it on my computer, and put it into Photoshop, and from there I could add the background and manipulate it however I wanted to. And eventually I came up with this. And that's the photograph of OV-10 Bronco firing spoke in the upper middle right. You can see some smoke. And what these airplanes did is they would fly along and find South Vietnamese or North Vietnamese, Viet Cong, NVAs, whoever, and as a target they would fire smoke rockets at it. And then either fighter bombers would come in, as you see on the lower right, a Canberra bomber coming in, and they'd attack them. You'll notice here that these smoke pods here, they're not explosive rockets, they're smoke rockets. But the Air Force put 4 M60 machine guns on these planes. And the pilots decided, well, we got machine guns, we can shoot back. So they weren't shooting smoke rockets at the targets. They were coming in and strafing them. And the Air Force said, well, we don't really like that, that's not your job. So they went back and forth for a couple of years, putting them on, taking them off, putting them back on. And the guy who commissioned this painting, he laughed about this so much. We became pretty good friends over emails. He's still in Australia. But this is a Peter Condon. He was a group captain, Royal Australian Air Force. And he commissioned this painting of the Bronco. And he and a group of Australians flew in Vietnam while seconded to the U.S. Air Force. And what they flew, their call sign was always Sideliner. He was Sideliner 23, and he explained to me what that meant. And Sideliner 23 had a specific job of supporting the United States Army, the 1st Division of the United States Army, also known as the Big Red One. And he's pretty proud of that. Okay, that's enough of my paintings. I'd like to show you two artists that influenced me the most. Here again, some of you older guys are going to recognize these. Anybody recognize PT-109? A model kit? And P-38, that's from about 1970. These two artists, John Steele and Jack Linwood, really had an influence on me. More than any other influence, model airplane boxes were mine. I didn't even realize it at the time, but this is how I became interested in art. John Steele, kind of an evil looking guy, but he would paint in a very loose style. And he painted all kinds of things, not just model airplane boxes or tank boxes, but illustrations for magazines and movie posters. And he painted, I always thought he painted so loosely, I could go up to that tank, and if I rapped on it, I could feel the armor plate. There was something about his style. You know, if you look at the Mustang on top, can anybody identify something wrong with that Mustang? There's two things. Anybody? Anybody? Well, it's actually an H model, not the D model that was mostly used in World War II. It has the taller tail and a different scoop underneath. And H models never flew in World War II. But there's one other thing that's even more glaringly wrong. The red bar. Who is?
Oh, the red bar.
You're the red bar. That's it. That didn't come into being until 1947. And I've always liked that painting, but I have to laugh at it because it's so easy to make mistakes like that.
In your previous picture of the P-38,
Yeah.
you notice one prop is feathered?
Yeah, I did. Let me see if I can get back to that.
And his wingman was in trouble, so he shut down the number 2 engine. And the Macadema went after the one engine P-38, and then he fired it back up, flew away. Yeah, or got on its tail. We ended up shooting. That was an actual account.
That's an actual event.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The stick bones. I saw that when they had that P-38 up in Superior
Still have
and
it.
Poplar when it was on pedestals.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was really nice. Good eye.
Well, that was a Starling condominium at that time.
That was a what?
A Starling, a Blackbird condominium when it was sitting outside.
Oh, really?
If you look close, it was a lot of birds had houses in it.
Oh.
So it's inside now. So
It's inside. I saw it when it was at an open county and I was restoring it.
Yeah.
And it looked nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it deserved better than being out of. Yeah, and by the way, feel free to ask any questions or comments. I'm more than happy to spout off.
I got a question.
What's that?
What medium do you paint in?
I use oil on canvas, and I love oil. It's actually the easiest. If anybody's ever tried watercolors, I'll salute them. They're the most demanding medium to paint in. And I use oils, and these guys actually use what was called a gouache, or a gouache, which is a very thick egg tempera. But the nice thing about it, it dried quickly for any type of deadlines in production of artwork. But John Steele was noted for doing these paintings real quick. And unfortunately, these guys had the graphic artists, the studios, would throw away the art. You know, they'd get done with it and they'd throw it away.
There's a lot of fine detail to some of your painting. It really makes it look great. Do you have to modify your brushes a little bit to get to that level of fineness of detail?
What I do now, I've found that I go to Walgreens, Walmart, and I buy the really cheap brushes. I buy them in bulk, basically, for the fine work. And they're like 10 brushes for $2. And I have other brushes that are $80, but I really love these little fine brushes. As I'm getting older, I'm having trouble doing that finer detail. So I'm going into other styles, and I think it's a good compromise. It's a good trade-off. But the fine detail, I do like doing that.
How much time per week do you put into your art?
Right now, I've been building an airplane, so none. But I used to work, I had a full-time job. I managed a paper warehouse at a print shop, and I was 40 hours or better a week. And I'd come home and I'd paint, I tried to paint 20 hours a week on that. And then I was selling prints too at the time, so I was busy. And now I'm retired, and I still do commissions. I have information there if you're interested. But I only do a few commissions a year. It's just not relaxed, and I'm lazy.
Way to be.
It is, thank you, Jim.
Question?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, way on the edge here. When you're drawing the lines, how do you do that? Do you do that freehand, or do you have tools?
Drawing
which you can do that?
the lines. What I do, let's see if I can go
Say you're
back.
drawing a wing, you know, how do you make the line straight?
Good question. What I do is, OB10 came out, so it's terribly inaccurate. But I found a kit that corrected, it's epoxy wings. It's aftermarket. You can buy all kinds of aftermarket stuff about airplanes. But I bought these, they're longer wings. I really go for the accuracy with the models because I don't have to correct things later on. But once I do that, I put the picture on Photoshop, and I come up with this, and I can put it on my printer and make it as big as I want. And what I do then is if it's multiple pieces of paper, I tape them onto the canvas and then put a piece of carbon paper under it and trace it out with that. And I'll even go as far as taking the steel ruler and putting magnets on the back of the canvas to attach the ruler on the front. And that'll give me straight lines. And a lot of times it's just, yeah, close enough. And you can take it to the point, I've done this, where it just, you lose the soul of the painting by over-painting it, trying to get every rivet in there. It's not necessary. Some of these people in wildlife art in particular, they will paint every blade of grass in front of a deer. And people don't see that in real life. You know, you don't see little details, you see the big picture. And it's the same thing with these airplanes. Sometimes you can overpaint them, the idea that you want it to look like a photograph, and you lose the soul of the airplane. You lose the soul of the picture. But does that answer your question?
In the back, there's a question. In the back.
Oh, hi.
So, much. So do you like to
You know what?
work in basic shapes?
Can you speak up? I have hearing aids.
Oh, do you work in more basic shapes, or do you outline everything before you go through with the actual painting?
I do everything.
Okay.
I draw pretty much everything that is on, that's on this, I'm going back and forth. I go back, I pretty much put everything in there that I can, but obviously, you can't do everything, especially when this painting was 20 by 30, so it's close to what you're seeing there. But what I'll do is I'll do the framework, and I'll put the paint on thick, and then I'll paint under the stuff that's under the framework as I go. And a lot of times that's not exact, but it's close enough. You know, if you want exactness, you know, get a blueprint. Like I said, you can ruin a good idea by going too far with detail. Well, I like questions. What's that?
Well, having painted a little bit, I always have the hardest time is when to stop.
Oh, good question. Good comment. I do too. And I have done paintings that I've been just the most minor things have driven me crazy, where I wouldn't give up on it. But when you get a commission, you kind of go, well, I got a deadline. And these guys like Jack Linwood and John Steele, they did deadlines all the time. They'd do a painting in a week. And it's a discipline you need to do. You got to develop confidence in yourself. And I've yet to do a painting where I said good enough, where anybody's commented on the things that I wish I'd kept doing. So try to overcome that. You know, it slows you down. It's a painting. I mean, it's good enough and learn from it. Anything else? Thank you for the questions. And that's, yeah, we went. Yeah, my brother Emery, he's a few years older than me, but he built this Japanese tank when I was a kid. And I can still remember picking that up and him catching me playing with it, him just yelling at me. He did not like that. This is not an airplane, by the way. This is a Centurion tank painted by John Steele. And I love that painting. It's got so much atmosphere in it. It's got so much detail that's basically hinted at. Your question was, how detailed should you go in? And he only hints at the details. I wish I could be as good as him at that. It's not necessary to paint every little thing. Great work. Jack Linwood. Anybody remember that model kit? You do? The caption, what's that?
Well, our dad worked on the original B-25s that came through Minneapolis.
Oh, on the Modification Center?
Yep.
Okay.
And, we put, when I built that model, I put the wooden guns and the tail observation stinger.
Okay.
And then painted the slots for the elevation as per the way the guys did it at the Modification Center.
Awesome.
Mid-Continent Airlines is who was commissioned to do the airplanes.
Your dad's not alive, is he?
No.
That's cool.
But, yeah, it was a fun model to build.
I built a couple of them.
Pretty detailed.
Yeah. There's a photo on the right, and I had to edit that down because it was kind of a little racy. I don't know if anybody would object, but I did cut it down. And I like the caption for that. It was from a magazine that did a bio of Jack Linwood. And it reads, Linwood has the most delightful job around, creating the world's most beautiful women. Well, I kind of question that. I don't think he actually created any women, but he had a good time. He did a lot of work for Stag magazine and movie posters. I don't know if you remember the movie Airport 79. The 747 lands on the ocean and sinks. Well, he did the movie poster for that. And again, Jack Linwood had it's kind of his signature, but he loved to put smoke to draw your eye around in the picture. And it's very effective. That kit, by the way, was kind of garbage. And finally, I don't know if anybody remembers this one. This is very famous. It seemed like every hobby shop had this B-17 kit. And the sad thing about it was, as soon after that came out, a law called Truth in Advertising was enacted. And what it did was pretty much forced all the model manufacturers to go with photographs of their kits. And it eliminated the artwork. And you know, basically what it was the government thought no one wanted Junior to be disappointed that his B-17 kit didn't include actual exploding flak. And I think it's too bad, because this type of artwork really inspired me. I wasn't even aware of it at the time, but it did make me think about these things. And now we have photographs, a lot of computer art, and I haven't quite decided what I think of computer art. Some of it's beautiful, but some of it's like, cool. Okay, now on to home-built aircraft. This is my Legal project, and this is mine on the right here, on the left, I should say, headed out in the sun about 2 weeks ago before I went to Oshkosh. And the one on the right is built by a man named Sam Buchanan. And that's been featured in Sport Aviation and Kit Planes, and it's pretty famous. And it's the one that inspired me to build a Legal. It's not a pretty airplane by any means, but I think it's cool. It kind of grows on you. And I'm going to fold the wings on mine, and I want to trailer it. I just can't afford a hangar. So one of the things I've done is build a fuel tank. Actually, I built 6 or 7 fuel tanks. Have you been there? Yeah. And I used rivets and Pro Seal, and it doesn't leak. I hope it doesn't, because it's going to be sitting in my lap. That's a little scary. On the metal is my folding elevator and tail, and I've set it up for inspections. And also I have a no-go gauge on my cables. I don't want you to think I'm some goofy artist that doesn't know anything mechanical. I'm fairly well versed in this stuff, but I value my skin, so I want to do it right. And here's the tail surfaces. This is the plans method of doing it. It's just aluminum tubing and gussets. And on the right are my mechanisms for folding the tail and elevators. And that's my own design. I hope it works. And the wing. I'm kind of proud of the way I beveled the top smart cap. I used my car power windows to make a perfect level, going from out of the garage into my garage. I'm kind of proud of that. And here's a trailer. There's an app called SketchUp. Has anybody used that? You guys have used it. Are you good at it? No? Once you get on top of the learning curve, it really works nicely. I designed the fuel tank on it, and when it was all said and done, it calculated on SketchUp 5.2 gallons. And when I filled it with water to start with, 5 gallons. So I thought, wow, this is worth learning more. So I've designed a trailer for it, and I'll be probably getting the steel for that one of these days. And finally, did anybody notice the Grob egret at Oshkosh that was at the Boeing Plaza? No, it was a big 108-foot wingspan airplane. It's got a 1,600 horse turboprop engine, and the Germans built it back in the 80s as kind of a poor man's U-2. But Arnie, he was visiting, he came up to see me when I was at the Minnesota Hall of Fame. He came up to see me, he flew up from Texas, and a few weeks later he said, hey, guess what? I'm gonna be flying at Oshkosh. So he had his Grob, and what that did, there was a glider sitting next to it on Boeing Plaza for a couple days. But they towed this glider over the Andes Mountains in Argentina. His airplane's rated for 50,000 feet. He wears a halo outfit, full mask, everything, automatic parachute. Well, the Grob had the Paralym glider had 2 occupants. They released at 47,000 feet and found waves coming off the mountains, and they got it up to 72,000 feet. And it's a record for a glider. Now they're trying to get financing to do it again, and they're gonna run the record for 90. Yeah. Arnie he's a good friend of mine. He has quite a business. If you look back at the hangar, you'll see he has a Convair 440. He has a Temco TT1 jet, but his business is they do airborne surveillance, testing. They put up any type of atmosphere. Anyway, that's the end. Thank you.